we'll make a start. A very warm welcome on this rather grey and rainy afternoon. Thank you for being with us. This is the second week of what has been a very, for those of you maybe who've attended last week or some of last week's event, a very diverse and, though I say it myself, fascinating array of different events, all connected with the theme of the Insiders Outsiders Festival, which I was the initiator of, that ran from March 2019 to March 2020, which has proved to have a wonderfully sort of fertile afterlife in the digital age that we find ourselves in. Sorry, I'm just going to let in a few more people. So this is actually already the second series of online events that has provided an opportunity to explore these themes further. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the waiting room option. Admit, there we go. I have to say that this is a very special event. It is the only one so far, and in fact, only one of two, in which we actually have a member of that very remarkable generation which the whole festival is celebrating, namely the painter Suzanne Perlman, appearing in the flesh, as it were, but even more specially, an intimate and very personal event, because she's actually in conversation with her grandson Matthew. So I think without further ado, except for a few practicalities, which I will come to in a minute, I will hand over to Matthew to set the ball rolling. But if I can just reiterate, if you wouldn't mind
I don't know why.
Excuse me, can you please make sure everybody that you are muted, that your microphone, yes,
Are
the
you
red
muted?
circle is.
Are you muted? Yeah, can you see? My picture should come up there. I don't mind if it doesn't, but
Don't worry about the picture, and please just don't talk, because you know we don't want to be interrupted. If you wouldn't mind, thank you. Fine, I would suggest speak of you, because that means that you will focus on the main protagonist, the most important people today, namely Suzanne and her grandson Matthew. And last but not least, there will be a chance to ask questions afterwards. And because of the numbers involved, I very much please no background noise.
Any minute.
Please make sure that you type your questions in to the chat option, okay? And then I will field them, Matthew, at the end. Okay, so without further ado, and please no background noise or commentary, I will hand over to Matthew.
Thank you very much, Monica, and hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. We hope to give you a wonderful show. Firstly, we'd just like to thank Monica for organising such a terrific programme of events, and we are both delighted to be a part of it.
Sternberg, that was his name. Remember him.
So just one little thing to reiterate what Monica is saying. If we could all go on mute, that way there'll be no background noise, and we'll all be able to hear everyone clearly. So a little bit of background of myself. So I started working with my grandmother a few years ago after she gave me a call to come over and help her move some of her paintings. And of course, I always knew she was a painter. She's my grandmother, and we have art of hers at our home. But I never realized the true extent of this. And I came over and I saw all of these paintings stacked up against each other all over the house. In every corner, every room, there was another painting. And I just thought to myself, these paintings need to be seen by the world and not just kept indoors. So I thought to myself, I've got to do something about this. And I did. And I started slowly. And that was on social media. I started Facebook, I started an Instagram, and I started to try and just get some recognition and awareness of her work. This then evolved, and I started looking into putting on an exhibition. And we had one exhibition in Venice during the Biennale. Of course, as my grandmother has rightly pointed out, she had many exhibitions beforehand. All around the world. But since moving to London, this was slightly less the case, because my grandmother, after this remarkable life, which you're going to hear all about, painted more for spiritual purposes rather than commercial ones. And that's what left a gap for me to fill, to try and grow some recognition of her work here in the UK, after she already was a very well-known artist elsewhere in the world. So I curated an exhibition for her at the Dutch Centre, and that exhibition was awarded Critics' Choice by the Financial Times, which was a remarkable success.
was not the first critic's choice.
Nor was it the first critic's choice, as my grandmother has again pointed out. But this one, a number of critics, but this one was another one to add to the roster. And this was followed by an acquisition by the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, which is a fantastic honor, of course. And
He selected one of my paintings.
they did select one of your paintings, and we hope that there's more to come with more museums, and there will be more news to follow over the next few months, although nothing to be revealed today. And last year, I created another exhibition of hers at the Saatchi Gallery in London. So it's been a fantastic journey that I've had, and not knowing too much about art, and most of my knowledge has come from this woman to my left, who knows so much about art and the world, and I have learned so much, and I hope that we can all learn something today. So on that note, I'd like to start from the beginning, which I guess is generally a good starting point for most stories. And you have told me that your love of art started in your parents' art and antique store in Hungary. So could you please tell us all about that and how your love of art started there?
Well, my parents had an art gallery in Budapest, quite a well-known one, and they mostly sold antiques, but they're absolutely crazy about paintings. They have a beautiful art gallery with magnificent paintings. And I thought they were my family. I thought that this is really something. My aunts and all the people around, so they sometimes grew into me, like they grew into my veins. I didn't even realize this was art. This was just something quite natural to me.
So you were in your parents' store, and because there was so much art around you, you absorbed it.
Yes, I absorbed it, and I wasn't quite aware of it, that this was something special. I thought it was quite a natural thing to have all art and to be just surrounded by it. That's quite natural.
So this was when you were 8 or 9 years old, you were working in their store, and you were surrounded, you knew all about these different artists and all these different movements.
Yes, I did. But what was very interesting, that in that time, one of our very well-known friends, who was also a great art collector, he called us, and he had an enormous collection of drawings and pictures, a photograph of all the paintings in the world. Postcards. I said, I would need somebody who could would arrange it according to the name and put it into proper
order, catalog.
In a catalog. You have to catalog each artist. So as it happened, we were 8 years and my brother was a year older, and we sat down with all this enormous surrounding of photographs of great paintings, but all of different masters. And I used to call out to my brother, do you have a Matisse? Do you have a Raphael? Do you have a Monet or a Manet? It was, the names were all there, and we had to put it all together. So what happened when I got to Europe and we went to the museum, they were like old friends. I got, of course, very excited that I say the original, but I knew them already as friends. Mm-hmm. So it was, it engendered a kind of quality in me that seemed that it belonged to my being.
So you almost, at 8 or 9 years old, you almost had a degree in the history of art.
Somehow,
at 8 or 9 years old.
Unknowingly, I got a great knowledge about art.
Well, that's amazing. And let's now fast forward a few years, and we'll fast forward to 1939.
Matthew, I'm really, really sorry to interrupt the flow, but there's quite an unpleasant background noise, and my IT skills don't seem to be up to muting absolutely everybody. So kind of before you carry on, and I do apologize for interrupting, can everybody please make sure, and I suspect Miriam, you may be the culprit here, you must mute yourselves, otherwise there's too much background interference. The event's also being recorded, and it would be a great shame not to have the best quality sound. So please, please, please.
Monica, you might be able to just hover over, and there are 3 dots, and if you click, there we go. All
yes, it's all fine. All done, right? Okay, thank you very much. Sorry.
Okay, so we're fast forwarding now to 1939. You had recently married Henry Perlman
Right.
after a whirlwind romantic encounter, and you moved with him to Rotterdam, where he was living.
Yes.
You moved with him to Rotterdam.
And he had his office there.
He had his office there. You were only 17 years old.
Yeah.
Tensions in Europe were, of course, beginning to rise.
Yes.
Holland was no longer safe. You had to leave Europe.
No, actually, that we weren't safe. He believed that we were safe.
You thought you were safe. Well, tell us then.
Yes.
Tell us how you escaped Europe. What led to you having to leave Europe and ending up on the other side of the world?
This will be an extraordinary story, really, because I tell you, my husband had a big grain office with grain in Rotterdam, and he was the youngest member of the Grain Society. The Grain Society received an order from Paris, how you call it?
A tender.
A tender for grain for the French army for Hill France. And my husband was the youngest member, and he also put in a tender. And lo and behold, all the grain merchants had put in this tender for the very important quality and quantity of grain for France. My husband, the youngest member, he gains his order.
So Henry won the tender. He won this contract to supply grain. How did that take you from Holland to ending up and then escaping Europe?
So he got a contract from the French government, and he had to go over and sign the contract. And very shortly after, he got a telegram from one of the ministers who was also involved in this contract to come instantly to Paris. Of course, we didn't know all about it, but we got our visas. In those days, you needed a visa. And we instantly went to Paris. Arriving in Paris, the minister waited for us, and he said in French, "Henri, j'ai sauvé vos vies." I don't know if you all speak French, but it means, "Hey, Henry, I saved your life." And my husband was always very humorous, and he said, "Vous Français, vous exagérez toujours. You French, you always exaggerate." This was all. In 3 days, there came the bombardment of Rotterdam and the Nazi invasion of Holland.
And did this man, he knew that this was happening and he decided to save you?
My husband, Harry, made a good impression on them. And he sent this telegram really to save us. Can you believe it? This is a miraculous event.
So that's incredible. So your husband, he won this contract. You're saved by the skin of your teeth by this man who decided to save you. You're now in Paris. Holland has been bombed by the Nazis. What do you do next?
My husband and myself, we went to the Dutch embassy, and we said, "What I have to do? I am in the reserve. How can I get back to Holland?" And the ambassador looked at him, and ambassador consul looked at him. He said, "Henri, I tell you, I advise you to get out of Europe. We have the Dutch Netherlands territories overseas. I will see where you can go." He went in next room. He came out very quickly. The next ship is a merchant ship. You will be able to get 2 tickets on it. This is a ship that will be sailing in almost 3 weeks' time. Get yourself a ticket. I'll get it for you, and you pay for it.
So the ambassador tells you that you can go to one of the overseas territories in Holland. You get a ticket, you're in Paris.
Yes.
Presumably the boat is not going from Paris, it's going from one of the ports.
The boat had to leave from Bordeaux, of course.
So how did you get from Paris to Bordeaux?
We just ran out to the station, and we couldn't believe it. It was completely full of people waiting to get on the trains. When the trains came, they saw this enormous quantity of people there. The trains didn't stop. And we were also among them. And all at once, the Orient Express came with a tremendous speed. And my husband, and unbelievably, he won a prize in his school for high jump. And he took me under his arm, in the other arm he had a valise. We jumped on the Orient Express and we were on it. And we went down to
Bordeaux.
Bordeaux.
So, wow. So you managed to get to Bordeaux, and my grandmother ended up boarding what turned out to be the last boat that left France on the day the Armistice was signed and the Nazis invaded France. So this really was a miraculous
Yes,
escape, was it not?
We were told that the oceans were already these mines, and this merchant boat had already minesweepers on board. That is going to be a very dangerous journey, but we went.
And you were only 17 years old, so what was it like to be away from your family? And
I was a young bride, I was 17 years old, and we arrived in Curaçao.
did you miss your family? Were you worried?
Of course, we were very missed, but I'm a Hungarian, I came from Budapest, and my mother was so terribly worried when she heard about the invasion of Holland. I had sent a telegram immediately that I am in Paris. But the telegram didn't arrive only a day later, but luckily she got the news that I wasn't anymore there when the invasion took place.
Why, I bet she was worried sick. I'm going to now show our listeners a painting you did of a memorial of the Holocaust. I hope you can all see the screen. This is a Holocaust Memorial painting, and you know it's such a powerful image, and it has this ghostly feel almost. What made you paint this?
What happened there seemed to be absolutely impossible, inhuman, and one had somehow to respond to it. And I responded to it by trying to show how is it that what can inhumanity do against humanity? What is it possible for a civilized world to do that to your fellow friends, to your very people who live next door to you, who possibly were kind and good to people who were in need, and to do this impossibly, improbable, impossible event to their own humanity. That is something that is absolutely out of anybody's mind that something like this could happen.
And was it difficult to make this painting?
It wasn't difficult because I just had to express myself somehow. You cannot even speak about it. You must look for a language to put somehow your involvement, your feelings about it. The most terrible, fantastic inhumanity would happen.
Mm. Well, it's certainly a powerful image. And now returning back to Curacao, if you can cast your mind back, you sail for a month, you arrive in Curacao, in this tropical island,
yeah.
Totally new part of the world. And you've once told me of this epiphany you had when you arrived in Curacao and you saw a blind lady weaving a basket. How did that story influence your painting?
That was something extraordinary that I have to tell you. I used to go out on my own outside just to see the world in this tropical island. And I always took some painting stuff with me. I always used to have a little carriage and I had my painting stuff with me. And as I was walking, suddenly I saw a native lady coming out, and I could see that she was blind. And she sat down and she started to weave a basket. Now it was very interesting because later I understood that these people on that island were extremely independent. Even if they were blind, they would do some work and they would study something to look after their own sustenance. And she started to weave the basket. And as she was starting to, I painted her. And I went back home and I put the painting outside to dry. Next morning, the gardener comes to whom I was working, the young man working with outside. He tells me, "What's that?" And I didn't know what he was working. I said, "What? About a plant or something?" "What's that?" I said. "What's that where you are standing there? I need it." Good heavens. She is blind, I know her. I said to him, why do you want it? He said to me in his own papiamento, in all his language, tamasha, mashakasa. That means it has a tremendous weight, but for him weight meant it really weight because he was a strong person and weight was something elementally strong. I said, why do you want it? He said, I will pay you as many days here to work if I can get it. I was so moved. I understood that I could communicate. I didn't know his way of talking yet because it was a native tongue. But I could see that I could communicate with these people.
With your art?
With my art. I was so taken by it. I gave it to another person and he didn't say thank you. He ran away with it. And
so that's an incredible story, because a man who perhaps doesn't have
no education at all. He never saw us painting and he didn't know anything about art. And he should say something. The most elemental requirement in art is
gravitas.
Gravity, which is weight.
I think
that is a distinction between a photograph and a work of art, gravity, because this is the very first requirement. And this was for me an indication that I could communicate with the people around me, and it was very important.
I think that it's an amazing starting point as well for the rest of your paintings, and I'm gonna now show a few more. Your early works as well, so vibrant. What do you think drew you to painting the local people of the island?
The local people of the island, I came from Europe, and they were different, but they had a certain, I must say, gravity in them, something so strong and honest and straightforward and elementally right, something that had to be put down. And my sentiment, my feeling about it, that was the way I started to paint these people. And once I remember the native said, looked at the painting, I have never seen people looking like this. And he became so straight. He became somebody so proud all at once. It was a representation what he thought was elementally right.
And is that how you wanted to portray the people you painted in your work?
It is not what I wanted, what I had to.
Well, you were called upon it.
I really felt that I'm here and I'm called upon it to paint these people, and I did. And you know, interestingly, I won a prize in Paris. It's La France Afrique shows a painting.
This is the pride, the painting that you won.
La Prix France Afrique. And Malraux, the great writer, gave me the prize.
Well, that's wonderful, and I think it's
such an elemental painting. But in Paris, people have tremendous sense of what is right.
Well, that's clearly they made a fine choice. Clearly they did.
They were great. They're great, highly known, intelligent people. Besides, they were great experts of art. A prize like this, you don't get so easily.
And so moving on to some of your other works, more the landscapes, very vibrant works full of color and soul and energy. And even after all of your time in Curacao, when you moved to London, you continue to paint even our grey skies with such color and force. What is it about, what does color mean to you in these paintings and nature?
Color for me means vitality, means life, and means the sincerity of your feelings, and that you are able to express yourself, and also a certain sense of religion, of thanking God that you are able to do it, and that your colors mean something very important to you, and it can communicate to people.
That's wonderful. And you know, nature is something that you speak to me a lot about as well. How does nature come out in your paintings?
Nature is an essential part of your soul. And this is what happens. You get into a different environment and you have to express yourself. And not only you speak as a technical artist, but your soul speaks. And it is interesting that the viewers very often are able to communicate because they see something as they can't express it by, but there is something, they say it is it.
Mm. Well, after about 2 decades of living on the island, you were selected to work with the great Oskar Kokoschka in Austria. Tell us about that experience.
Yes, there was an interesting event. Kokoschka was working in Salzburg, and he gave sometimes some workshops, and he would select about 12 to 14 people to work with. And I wanted to go and see him. I just wanted to see this man because he had some extraordinary work, but I thought was very intrinsically different what I've seen before. So I went up to Salzburg, to Austria, and they told me that the group will have to go in the highest point of Salzburg into the weaponry up in the top, you know, that they used to shoot in World War II, and we would have enormous space there. And we should have to work there a week on our own, and the master will come after a week and will look at the work and select the people he will work with. So I went, of course, up to the highest point in Vienna, and we worked there for a week, and the master came, and he was with great joy, it was actually great singing, he came, and he loved it that people sang and were so jubilant to see him. And we were all, there were many, many people, there were many artists. And we had all to sit down and wait, and he would interview and see the work of each person whose name was called out. So of course, my name is one of the last of the alphabet on the P. And I was sitting there and waiting, of course. And people were called in. And I saw people coming out from the room. And they were crying and they were in very sad state. And I figured out such people who I think are very good painters are so very effective, but they are not being required to return to work. And I thought when my name was called out, I jumped to the door and I opened it very big and I wouldn't touch it to close it. And I couldn't move in because I was sure that I won't have any strength if I closed it to open it, to be thrown out. And I opened the door and I couldn't get around. And all at once I hear in German, "Was machst du da?" What are you doing there? He said, "You have the arrogance to let the master wait for you?" I couldn't answer. He said, "Come on, I want to see you. I stepped near as far. The door was very far from where he stood, in the corner of the immense room, the hall. And as I approached to him, he said to me, "You look like my mother. You remind me of her." Of course, I didn't know whether that was good or bad. And then he looked at me, and I was really trembling. I was so excited. I couldn't really feel very quiet, seeing the giant master there. And he put his finger on one of the drawings, and he said, he said, "This line is quite interesting. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, not 1 minute less because all the doors are closed. Goodbye."
So he liked your work. He accepted you to work the next day.
Yeah.
How else do you think that he influenced you or had an
I didn't
impact?
look for influence. I just wanted to be in the vicinity of such a great man. And I didn't really think that I will get something out of it, except that I could work close to him, maybe in the same hall. There were 2 enormous halls there, and he spoke very little to me. He used to come around, he stood before me, and he said, and that was all. Nothing more. And then he worked there from 8 o'clock to 8 morning and night. There was hardly any time to eat. And when it was finished, I really thought I'm going to die because I felt so weak, completely exhausted.
But it was an amazing experience. It was a positive experience.
It was a very an extreme experience which I needed, and I really think he saved my knowledge, he saved my talent, and he gave me encouragement, and he told me I can work with him.
Well, that's an amazing, really amazing story.
It was an amazing story.
And after
totally unexpected.
After your period with Kokoschka, you spent some time in America, in New York, and you experimented with new styles. And I'm going to show our audience a few examples of your abstract works. Did New York influence the way you painted? What made you start with these abstract works?
Especially in those days, New York had a tremendous dimension. It was a totally different world. And the way people thought and expressed themselves was outstanding and very different what was generally known. It was very much abstract, and I started to work into abstract because I wanted to understand the mentality of the art. And I did some quite interesting work in my period as I stayed in the USA.
What do you think you're able to communicate with an abstract work that you're not able to communicate with a figurative?
It's not about this. You communicate where you are, and you must express yourself about it. And this was the only way I could express myself.
Well,
for me, art is very much communication, and that's important.
Well, I think that's a nice segue onto another style of your work, which is on your drawings, which is also a way of expression. And you have such sensitive drawings, and you've often told me that you sometimes do these drawings in 5 minutes and it's finished.
I always, when I got to England, to go to London, I always went out with a little notebook and a pencil or a crayon or whatever, ink drawing or whatever. And I saw something interesting. I saw a movement, and I immediately was able to jot it down. And those movements were very important, they were intrinsic for America. And it is really that these things are, this is a dancer, a Spanish dancer, but the way it's drawn and the way he moves is very much the essential quality of Spain, of such Spanish dancer. I don't think, I must say that really, that an American artist or an American altogether will be able to do this. I could only do it because somehow or rather I sipped in an international kind of a vogue, a kind of a trend of understanding, an intrinsic understanding of something that is needed to make it typical.
Mm. Well, they're certainly unique drawings, and they
Yes.
are very typical of your own style.
This was a Spanish dancers. It's called La Jota, and I was there watching, and at the same time they were dancing. I painted this.
Wonderful, wonderful. A final theme that I'd like to discuss with you that is also apparent in a lot of your work is the female nude.
Yeah.
You know, it's there. You painted a lot of these female nude subjects. What does that mean to you? How have you incorporated that
It's
into
interesting that the nude for me was something, the expression of wonder, of creativity, of vitality, of strength, of the human contact with the celestial. And that anatomy was very expressive to humanity and to what is creative and what is there to be born and to be. It was a quality. Humanity is not what people think only beautiful. It can not be beautiful, but it can be very important and very expressive as life is.
How do you think the way that you depict the female nude is different to the way that the female nude has been depicted in art history?
Well, I tell you, I cannot compare it. You depict it only the way as you saw it depicted. For instance, I'm dealing with an American woman. It's
This one here?
This woman. When I was in America, I painted this woman.
This was in 1945. This was when you were in Curaçao, this one.
Yeah, oh, that this was still in Yard. That's right. This was a European woman. And she was sitting there, and I said, she's in the nude. She has a very erotic body. But there is something intrinsically tragic in this woman. But how you say that word?
The predicament that she's in.
It is, I felt that she is in the predicament of life, because life has such beauty, but joy, but has so much tragedy. And this woman expresses in your nudity the predicament of life, because that's what life is all about. There is so much tragedy sometimes.
So the nude for you, you're not trying to objectify the female body or sexualize it. You're trying to...
I have just to put in what I see, because the nude is there, because it's so much connected with nature, with life, with creativity, with everything what is there in the world.
Mm. Well, I'd like to finish on one final note. I've lost count of the times you've told me to be grateful and appreciate the world and to be thankful. Is there anything you can share with all of us about gratitude and appreciation?
That is absolutely true. One can be so grateful to be here and to be able to be creative, and it is a gift of God. And I feel very strongly, religiously, that we are all connected. And this is a gift, and that we are really to be very grateful, joyous, and happy about it. Also, life is not easy. There is this tremendous joy of being to express the beauty of life.
Lovely. Well, on that lovely note, I'd like to thank you and thank everyone, and we're going to open up to questions now. I believe questions need to be typed in, and I will pass over to Monica now.
Very good. How wonderful. Thank you so much, Suzanne, and indeed Matthew. That was a truly lovely and very special interaction that we were privileged to listen into. Thank you, thank you. Right, please do start the questions coming. We don't have any yet. There's a lot to absorb there. Perhaps I can start with one question, Suzanne. It seems to me as an art historian, but with a very visual response to your work, that from the very beginning you were using colour and paint in an intensely expressionistic sort of way. And I just wonder, you talked about your encounter with some very important artists in your childhood in Budapest, but were the German Expressionists a group of artists that you were familiar with in your early years?
So Monica has asked whether the German Expressionists were artists that you were familiar with in your early years.
Yes, I saw their works. It is Bauhaus, a Bauhaus.
And what about the other German Expressionists like Kirchner or Emil Nolde?
All German Expressionists. I think it was the time of the Expressionists at that very point. It was a time. And it's quite possible that I have that quality in it.
I suspect it's an affinity, yes, rather than a direct influence. So you're not aware of any direct influence on that front.
So are you aware of a direct influence from those artists?
Actually, I tell you none.
No.
None at all.
Mm-hmm.
I am not aware of anything that I'm influenced with. I'm only aware of how I have to do it. And it's not what others have to do it or done it. I say they are great, wonderful, but it's no food for me. I don't take anything I cannot take because I have so much to give myself. There is no way of taking or to be trying to do something else.
A nice answer, thank you. Perhaps just before there are questions now coming in. Another just an observation, which I suspect quite a lot of the people listening in may not be aware that the great Oskar Kokoschka, already very well known as an Austrian/German expressionist, spent time in this country. He actually came via Prague to England in the late 1930s. And the reason I mention that is that most people don't even know that, but also very few people, although he was absolutely famous already in Europe, very, very few people in this country knew or appreciated his work. In a way, there is something quite un-English, un-British about your style, about his style. Is that something that Suzanne perhaps is conscious of?
Is there something about Kokoschka's style and your style as well? Kokoschka spent time in London. Is there something un-British about your style of painting when you paint in London?
I couldn't say what is British and what isn't. That's a very interesting question that you are asking, because it was really only Kokoschka who moves me in a way that I could get closer to it. I didn't wish anything to copy, but I felt there is an intrinsic power that I could maybe get acquainted with and go my own way. And this is what happened.
But the power was there even before you worked with Kokoschka.
But
so yes.
interestingly
So
enough,
was the power there before you were with Kokoschka?
No, it was, I'm saying.
Oh,
it was,
yes.
yeah.
no
doubt.
the dynamics was there. Really, it is very interesting. You have to be born with it.
No, I have no doubt.
That is not. You must have this kind of kind of art, this kind of what is food, what you intrinsic is. You must come with something that requires this kind of a development. There is nothing else.
Just following up on that, there was a lovely artist called Harry Weinberger, who was German Jewish, came to this country in the 30s, and he rather famously made a wild generalization, but he said basically that the kind of art he produced, which was essentially expressionistic, was rather alien to the much more muted and understated way of making art of most English artists. And it is a generalization, but I do think there's something in that. So it's a comment rather than a question. Shall we, Suzanne, we have some questions coming in from Stephen Duncan, who's going to be talking incidentally about his poet mother, Beata, at 6 o'clock. Suzanne, brilliant work. And yes, we can see German expressionists. What about other female artists? Are there any other women artists you feel an affinity with?
Are there any other female artists that you feel an affinity with?
I admire them all. I must say them. I don't really feel any, I must say, and this is true, I don't feel any affinity to any particular artist. I only feel the thing, how I have to do it. And I have great admiration for artists, but in no way somehow I feel that they're feeding me or that there is some connection there. Not to say that I don't have admiration for them. There are so many wonderful artists, but I don't have a personal kind of a need to be connected with them. This is, I have to be connected with myself, and this is not to be proud, but it is really the reality, and it is a necessity.
So neither male nor female, it's just a personal,
it's
a personal truth.
A personal, it is absolute truth, straight truth.
Fully understood. We have a question here from somebody called VF, so I'm afraid I can't identify the person. Thank you for that. That was fascinating. Which Hungarian artists or works of art do you remember from the 1930s while still living in Hungary?
Which Hungarian artists from the 1930s do you remember when you were living in Hungary?
You know, I have the names, but I don't have it on my tongue. They were very beautiful. They mostly painted, you know, very pretty women. And interestingly enough, what happened once, there was a painter who was getting known in London by the name of Fried Paul. Paul Fried. And this man came into the store and with his linen and with his wood to stretch the cotton, the linen very good way, painting on. And he told my father, "You have an art gallery here. Would it be possible that I could stretch my panel here, and would you put it out for me? Would you be able to do it?" And my father said, "Yes, I'm interested to do it. I will take if I can sell it, I take no money for it. You are not a rich man, you need every penny." And he came and he stretched his panel and we put it into the showcase. And they were nudes. The nudes were so erotic and so sexy that when we put it out, it was a tremendous group of people, and the morality police came to disperse them. And they told my father, "Take off the painting instantly. This is a very exciting painting. You can't leave it here." And he had to take it off. And he said, "Please, allow me to leave just a few with you." And we kept for him, and we sold it for him, and he gave him all the money. When I came here to London, I had to an auction, and they were auctioning a Fried Paul. It was nothing what it was in Budapest. The strength of his erotic dependence wasn't there. It was completely subdued, and it was a good printing of a nude, but it wasn't Fried Paul.
Well, there you go. Paul Fried was one, and I'm sure there were many others.
Many others, yes.
The same thing incidentally happened to Modigliani. The police came and removed some of his nudes from a Paris gallery. Right, I have a few more. There's a comment and a question from Ashley Holdsworth Quinn. Wonderful work, Suzanne, and such a privilege to hear you talk. Thank you. Are you still making art?
Are you still making art is the question.
I'm still, you know, I am now quite an aged person, and you know, it takes a tremendous power and strength to paint. You will not believe it. You have to put everything in it, what you got. And at my age, I haven't got everything. But I'm still working. But of course, when you work, you want to have the heights. And I'm not at the heights.
So Suzanne, are you drawing rather than painting? Is it sort of different media that you're working in now?
Are you doing more drawing than painting?
I do some drawing and painting,
yes.
But it is not the same as it was before.
Well, I think it's still not so bad. We had the exhibition at the Dutch Centre, which was the Critics' Choice in the Financial Times. That was in 2018, and Suzanne made a painting specially for that exhibition, and it was the one that was written about in the review. So I would have to politely disagree, and I think that there is still a lot of good work.
Lovely, I'm sure there is. And perhaps one last question, quite a specific one. Hold on, they're coming in thick and fast. Yes, from somebody called S. Patterson. Thank you for a fascinating talk. And then he or she asked, were there many artists working in Curaçao? Many Dutch artists went to the East Indies and worked in Bali and Java. And I wonder if there was a similar art scene in Curaçao. Interesting question.
Were there many other artists working in Curaçao?
There were artists working, but not this kind what I did, absolutely not. They were, you know, it's interesting that, for instance, the Royal Dutch Shell, if they were retired, they wanted to have a Suzanne Perlman. And they came in and they said, have you got some painting? I said to him, I don't have anything right now. He said, they're wonderful paintings, Sarah. We want a Suzanne Perlman. I said, why? Because it has the mood of this place that they want to remember.
But there were as well other painters there who you would paint with, but slightly different style.
To catch the mood of a painting is not something that you aim for. It happens and you can't help it. And this is the truth.
I think, you know, that there are now museums in Holland, the Rijksmuseum and the Stedelijk Museum, who are making a more conscious effort to collect more work of artists from Curaçao and other territories. So there should be more visibility over the next few years.
Good. And I think probably it's time to begin to wind things up, but I have two lovely comments to finish things off with from Patty. Suzanne and Matthew, I could listen to you both all day. Thank you for a fabulous talk and for the showing of Suzanne's art. And then lastly, from Ashley Holdsworth Quinn again, that's wonderful to hear. You're an inspiration. I'm sure, Suzanne, that you have heard that before. Let me just double check in case there. Yes, lovely Susie and Matthew from Naomi Perlman, who I suspect is a relation. Thank you very much. That was a huge pleasure. Thank you so very much, Suzanne. We will all remember this with great, great affection and a sense of being very privileged. Thank you very much, everybody.
Much for everybody who is here and who was listening.
Just
God bless you.
And to you too. All the very best, Suzanne. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Listening in. All the very best. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.